The following content is provided by MIT OpenCourseware under a Creative Commons license. Additional information about our license and MIT OpenCourseware in general is available at ocw.mit.edu.
While everybody's getting settled now, I want to do a little bit of introductions. This is the first of the CDB Spring Forum series on Sensing Place, Photography as Inquiry. And it's the first of 8 lectures this spring. We'll be going every week now except for the spring break and Patriots Day, but basically every Monday until May 8th. And Alex McLean is starting us off. Next week, Camilo Jose Vergara will be coming. I don't know if you all know his work. Camilo has been photographing American inner cities for about 30 years, and he goes back to the same places over time, and you get this incredible sense of how neighborhoods are transforming in cities like Camden, New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Detroit. And he'll be followed up the following week by Lou Watts, from a photographer, actually he was born in Newton, but he's been living in Richmond, north of San Francisco, for quite a few years, taught at Berkeley, and then is now a professor at UC Santa Cruz. He's using his camera. He's African American, and he uses his camera as a way to investigate African American culture and the relationships between rural places and cities. He's particularly well known for his work in West Oakland in California. On April 3rd, after spring break, Wendy Ewald will be coming. Wendy, like Camilo Vergara, is a MacArthur Fellow. She has developed her photography working with children, and with partnering with the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke. She's, over the past few years, developed a program, Literacy Through Photography, where children in Durham, North Carolina, and now it's spread around the world, use photography as a way of investigating their neighborhoods, and through that investigation, develop their academic skills as well. Wendy's a photographer, and her photography depends on setting in motion these kids who are documenting their place and space and culture. On April 10th, that will be followed up by our own Larry Bale and Steve Moga, PhD candidate here in CDB, as well as a young photographer named Will Stacy from New York City. Steve and Will have both photographed New Orleans, both pre- and post-Katrina, and they'll be talking about the role of photography in planning for the rebuilding, getting a handle on New Orleans and its rebuilding, and what photography can contribute to this effort. On April 24th, the next week after... Yes, sorry. I'll stand closer to Alex because he's the one that's mic'd up. After that will be Martin Krieger from the University of Southern California, a planning professor who's using photography to map ordinary systems in the city that otherwise go unnoticed. He'll be followed by Leslie Tuttle, who a photographer here in Boston, who 35 years ago photographed villages in a village in Turkey, and then went back a few years ago to re-photograph, and ended up tracing the diaspora of the young children that she knew 30 years ago to Istanbul and then to London. So she'll be talking about photography as a means of understanding culture over time, and of seeing literally the changes in space and place and culture as these generations move from rural village to the metropolis and on to the United Kingdom. And I'll be ending up with the finale on May 8th, presenting the way that I use photography as a form of inquiry and understanding and investigating landscapes, both urban and rural. So the theme of this spring series is to look at how photography can not just be a mode of documenting, but really a mode of thinking, a mode of inquiry, a way of coming to understand a place, of sensing place, that's very compatible with other forms of understanding, be it mapping or writing or quantitative studies of a place. And we'll be, all of the folks who will be talking are photographers. Some of us are also planners and designers, but not all of us. But every photographer that's coming is working in some way with designers and planners, with people in their environments to think about how their environment is changing and how one might take that understanding in order to transform lives and spaces. So without any further introductions, general introductions, I'd like to just say a few brief words about Alex McLean. It's really wonderful to have him here this semester. He's co-teaching a class with me on photography as inquiry, and Alex's work is so really extraordinary. Like Camilo Vergara, he's been photographing some of the same places now for 35 years, right? And so again, he has captured this sense of change over time, but rather than on the ground, from the air. He's been asked by a number of cities to help them get a grip on what's happening in terms of metropolitan growth and inner city change. So cities of Kansas City, for example, and is it Dallas, right?
Houston. And Dallas.
And Dallas have asked him to come, have hired him to come, and basically the brief they've given him is to say, tell us about our region. What's going on here? And he's been working with the Lincoln Land Institute on a research project called Visualizing Density, which I think he's going to talk about tonight. Alex's work has been well recognized in this country. You can go see an exhibit at the Peabody Essex Museum that's still up of his work in Salem. And he's been widely exhibited in the U.S. and abroad. The French and the Italians in particular have really picked up on his work and have been fascinated with what it has to say about the nature of American cities. So without saying any more about your many honors and awards, I'll turn the floor over to Alex. Welcome.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you. It is amazing that I've actually been doing this now for 30 plus. Uh-oh. Is it little tech support here? I'm loaded on both sides of my waist, but this light's on.
Yeah, it should be on.
How about here? This one too?
That's on.
Oh, okay. I can always. Oh, there we go. There we go. I can hear it. Good. Anyway, I was saying that, is that too loud or about right? I was saying that I've been photographing now for over 30 years, doing aerial photography in all parts of this country over time. And so I really started now to see my photography about flying over space as well as through time and seeing changes and seeing the landscape evolve. Of course, looking into the landscape, you can see the evolution and the changing forms just in the patterns of the landscape. So it's been a great experience. The technology of photography has changed dramatically since I started out with Kodachrome film, manual focus cameras. Autofocus was a big deal. Light meters that could auto light to do your exposures was a big deal, especially flying where you I fly myself and photograph at the same time, so that was one less task. and then to see it evolve into going from E4 film to E6 film, and then on to digital printing, and not being able to believe it, finally digital capture. And in between there, we picked up technology of GPS, so you could track where you're going. And probably a remarkable development is Google Earth, as far as a research tool and being able to verify where you've been. But to give you a sense of the adventure of flying, the discovery, and the inquiry, I'll start off with these giant pivot irrigators, sort of this idea of dividing space and how the land is used and new technologies. Almost scaleless at this height. The pivots are a mile across, quite a bit larger than you might think, being about 4,000 feet above them. One of the great things about photography is just the shifts of scale you get, flying high, flying low, using different focal length lenses.
Cutting in and out. So
yeah.
you can continue. I mean, I'm just going to try to make sure that I don't know what's wrong with it. It's faulty. Try it.
There, how's that? Oh, that might work better. That sounds good. So here's another pivot irrigator with a strip across it. The wonderful textures and the light. And then just coming in closer and looking at details, the leftover space between two pivot irrigators is making a pattern, saying something about the use of the space. And then even looking closer as the watering arm stretches across the land, just making a pattern. And so in looking at landscapes, you have to really look into the landscapes to find your pictures. This is down in West Virginia, and in flying, finding these rail cars in the foreground here and just zeroing in on them to, find your pictures within this broad landscape. Likewise, the light is always changing, circling around, doing a 360, being able to highlight the tracks in a marshalling yard. And it's really, popping it with the light. So it's all part of the process. This is the plane I use. It's a Skylane 182. It cruises about 150 miles an hour. You can slow it down to photograph when you come to a point of interest. I use lenses from about 24 millimeters out to 300 millimeters in focal length. This is a GPS track of a flight in, I know I'm cutting in and out here.
Maybe just hold it in your hand, that might work better. The unit is faulty, it's not going to work all that well. So you can try to do whatever you need.
Okay.
It's going to cut in and out the room.
Is it a distraction? Would it be better just going with my voice? I'm hearing yes. Okay. So let's try that. If I'm
Turn it off, please. Yeah.
there
There we go.
we go. Okay, good. That sounds better.
Thank you.
So anyway, this is the GPS track here of a flight in Kansas City, and what you have are these nodes here, just where you're circling around. And basically, the process is discovery. Often I have 5 or 6 sites picked out that I know I want to photograph, and then is that one okay? Sorry. Take that one off. So often what happens is while you're flying, you'll see something of interest and you'll drift over to that and start circling that, and one thing leads to another, and you often forget what you're actually supposed to be photographing. But that's sort of the fun part of the discovery and the process. Now, I'm going to show pictures of a project that I've been recently working on. Ann mentioned it, working with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy with Julie Campoli. It's a project titled Visualizing Density, and it's really about looking at housing densities the difference between measured densities and perceived densities. And what we have been working on is building a catalog of images of different housing types from about 0.3 units an acre up to the highest we have so far is 220 units an acre. And I was just run through a little of this. This is just a sort of a metaphor for the idea of density in space and how we perceive density, what density looks like. Is it like this, or do people have in mind something like this when they're talking about density? Let's see if that will go off. Let's see. Sorry. Don't want to end the show.
Check.
But just click it out here. Sorry. Oh. Does anyone know how to get rid of this? I'm still in the slide here, just about. There we go. Anyway, looking at density, what does actually density look like? This is 11.7 units an acre. And this, what would you guess this to be? 11.7 units an acre. So, quite two different perceptions of what you might have for density. How do we get rid of this sucker?
You need to hit the left mouse button, you hit the right mouse button, and bring it up.
Ah, thank you. And then another example of same number of units per acre, quite different building typologies and spaces. One of the things in measuring density is you really need to know what you're measuring. We did units per acre, basically because that's what the zoning and the codes and the regulations go by, units per acre. When you look at the Back Bay, what are you really talking about is for the density of the Back Bay. It really depends what you're actually measuring. This is 30 units an acre. If you go exclude the Esplanade, then you're up to 37 units an acre. And if you look at these units down by Mass Ave, you're up to 70 units an acre. So there's a great deal of variation within the Back Bay as far as density.
What's the measurement?
It's housing units per acre.
But housing unit could be
Living units, then you might say.
regardless of the dimensions.
What? That's correct. Regardless, that's how it's measured. So this is right here at the end of Mass Ave. Obviously, these high-rise units really pick up the density there. And what we did in making the catalog, the paper catalog, is we did use 4 views primarily. A block view in close to get detail, a neighborhood view, and then a context view, and a vertical view, a plan view. So the catalog is basically 4 pictures of different neighborhood types. We put in street patterns to show the patterns, and the patterns in the public open space really make quite a bit of difference into how we perceive this. We have Radburn at 5 units an acre and Levittown at 5 units an acre. But if you look at the open space and the circulation pattern, they're quite different. Radburn has quite a bit of open space. Levittown has these little pocket parks that are somewhat leftover space. Then just looking at the street patterns, as the density levels increase, you can see the street pattern gets more complex. Then just going through the catalog is scheduled to be published as a book with 300 different housing and neighborhood types. And it's also going to be published on the web, which has the advantages of being interactive and being able to do searches for different elements. This is Golden Valley, Arizona at 0.3 units an acre. And what's important here is in the catalog and in the images, we mark off the actual area that's being measured. So going up 3.6 units an acre, Anthem, Arizona. Again, the area being measured is right here in this master plan community. Really a horrifying place when you see it from the air. It's just the layout of it. 5.5 units an acre. This is on the edge of Las Vegas, another just incredibly rapid growth area. And you can see the area that's being measured is over there, but somewhat the context of the development. This is a new urbanist project in Longmont, Colorado, 7.7 units an acre. This is the block being measured. Going up to 23 units an acre, Staten Island, duplex apartments, the context. And moving up here in the Beacon Hill, 52 units an acre, and the context there. And so you're really picking up quite high density in a very desirable and expensive neighborhood. And then the highest count we got to date is this 222 units an acre, San Francisco, and the measured area in its context. Julie and I have worked on other projects together. One was an interchange project in Vermont, looking at the interchanges and the zoning that's in place there now and sort of what the consequences are. And this is sort of a way of using photography to help people visualize what might happen and what are other scenarios. Looking at the build-out, the way the zoning is now, these random Butler buildings, gas stations, and stores. Another way of planning this with a change in zoning, still getting the same usage, but just more compact. And then using other tools, too, to help people visualize what space might be like. Envisioning a 2,000-foot walk in Burlington versus a 2,000-foot walk on the a 2,000-foot walk through a sort of a big box retail type development. You know, that 2,000-foot walk on the right side is next to impossible to imagine making. Now, this next group of slides, what I like to do is sort of look at the urban form going from the downtown out to the urban edge and look at those development patterns. This is downtown Houston. In the foreground here, you can see the ship channel going out towards the Galveston Bay. This is from about 5,000 feet. You get a sense of the overall expanse of the metropolitan area, the various grids and the grid shifts. You can see the downtown loop and the interchanges. Looking down from that altitude on the street grid, and then down lower at about 1,000 feet, looking across towards Midtown. This is downtown Houston. And then at the edge of Houston, the vast amount of parking, and it's a typical pattern to many cities. This is Tampa, Florida, the same type of thing. If you look at the high-rise area, you can see the parking around the outskirts in this gray area in the foreground, public housing, and the highways coming in, really creating a gray zone around the central part of the city. same type of pattern in St. Louis. You can see this whole blighted area is white flight. What is now becoming an urban forest where the old Pruitt-Igoe site was. And then the leftover infrastructure that you have from this white flight, this is in Kansas City, part of the Kessler's Parks and Boulevard system. You have just a few scattering apartments, which was once the whole street was aligned on both sides. And so we've left behind a lot of this infrastructure in our inner cities. One thing you are seeing, it is now, I would say, starting in about the mid-90s, you really started seeing a reinvestment on the inner part of the city. Here on Cleveland, you have this new housing project going in. It's taking on, though, a very sort of suburban-looking look to it. Major redevelopment project on the edge of Denver, on the Cheyenne River. You can actually see part of the amenity is a kayak run here, and just eventually will be filled in with mixed-use apartments and residential office type buildings. One of the typologies that you see coming into the inner city are these wrapped structured parking garages with the apartments. And then as you go out to the outer, beyond the first ring neighborhoods, you come to the typical Beltway, Ring Road, and sort of the new urban development of single-use type of spread-out development. And it's interesting, this type of pattern, it's really hard to identify what part of the country you're in other than through the vegetation. It's just this homogeneous looking landscape. This actually, well, does anyone take a guess where this is? It's impossible to tell. This happens to be in Michigan. And the other edge city condition, the big office tower is out on the ring. This is Tyson's Corner, Virginia. The neighborhoods, looking down from about 5,000 feet, you can see all these enclave communities. None of the neighborhoods interconnected on the street pattern. I keep hitting that thing. Then the other thing you see with your neighborhoods is how we're segregated, the stratified, the subdivisions of a particular building type, and so you have stratified by income. This is large, very large houses in Sugar Land, Texas. And it works well as a picture with the cul-de-sacs overhead. The water feature is really retention basins for the development, which works as an amenity. And of course, with these big mega houses, you come into the issues of energy use just to run them. And then there's a big fascination with the lawn. This is here in Massachusetts, where the loam is being dumped on the yards to be spread out. Huge amount of lawns. They say there's the lawn area in this country equals the state of Mississippi, which is sort of an incredible statistic. Looking at the backyards in a subdivision in Kansas City, and sort of the typical American mowing his lawn with his trophy pool. It's interesting that as far as an environmental energy issue, we use 800 million gallons of gasoline to mow our yards a year, and it apparently attributes 5% of our air pollution comes from lawn maintenance, since the machines are so dirty. And then the other statistic with that is that we spill 2.5% of the fuel that we put into the tanks, which equals a little more than the Valdez oil spill per year filling them. So that's not getting into the fertilizers and the pesticides. This is in New Jersey, near Princeton, just, the extent of how spread out we are in our outer areas. It's quite incredible, just blanketing this very rich and productive farmland. In the center of this picture is a small hamlet. And when you look at this, you really realize how long it takes people to get in and out of their property, the making of soccer moms and isolating kids in neighborhoods totally dependent on the parents, and also discriminating against the elderly who might no longer be driving. You get a real sense in a lot of these projects how fast the change is coming to the landscape. New housing going in out in California. You can just feel the intensity of how it's being built out. This is sort of the ultimate of that. New housing going in Las Vegas, real production housing. It also speaks to the standardization in building housing, which also causes for a lot of the monotony and boredom in these types of projects. Ex-urban development, cutting down a hillside between Oakland and Livermore for a new housing development. This is south of Salt Lake City, another ex-urban development going in on agricultural lands. Between Tucson and Phoenix, manufactured housing. And you really sense in these places sometimes we're like warehousing people. The conflict between housing and agricultural lands shows up in this picture. Housing encroaching on this pivot irrigator is sort of a constant tension. Looking at the Cache Valley in north of Salt Lake City, very rich agricultural land, all irrigated, but the land is being fragmented by new developments. What you see are little up on the top there are two sort of Mormon towns, very densely settled, once with a very defined urban edge, but now it's being fragmented by schools, office buildings, and random apartment blocks. This is actually the growth boundary in outside of Portland, or on the Portland edge. You have the obviously the rural on the right. And the growth boundary is really actually a very interesting tool, and Portland is an interesting place to look and photograph. The growth boundary seems to work much better on the outside, what it's preserving, what's going on the inside. You still see a lot of the similar sort of suburban sprawl-like development. And just the extent of the outside edges of these cities. This is in Phoenix, Arizona. Another view looking across, and you get the sense of how filled in the space is with this type of housing. Looking at the retail component of the urban edge, large shopping malls, incredible amount of asphalt and parking. Huge shopping malls located way out for cheap land, to take advantage of cheap land. This is Katy Mills outside of Houston. And then around the edge, it hasn't been fully built out. It's planned for big box stores, such as this. And when thinking back about the box stores, I think they came sometime in about the mid-'80s here into the New England area. But people said like Starbucks, the big box stores are coming, and you really didn't know what they were talking about. And they really arrived fairly fast, similar to the three-car garage. All these sort of types of developments came at an alarming fast rate. And then, of course, there was the backlash where people tried to disguise them, such as this store here, with a nice faux colonial village or whatever. And then another type of disguise was to have, bring back Main Street to our retail areas. But then when you see where it is, it's just total phony urbanism. And it's, it predominates across all our institutions. This church in the foreground here is really just an extension of the Strip. Obviously a parking lot that is meant for just one day a week, probably half a day, one day a week. And with this comes our transportation system, the highway, usually failing between rush hour for a number of reasons. One is the infrastructure is crumbling and it's always being repaired, causing backups, lack of capacity, and also accidents clogging it. And when you speak of accidents, 40,000 plus deaths a year, which is really a phenomenal figure of casualties. The mentality of trying to pave your way out of these types of congestion. This is right here over in Medford. And along with this is the air pollution that goes with it. This is in California. And you really realize how thin our atmosphere is when you fly. At 10,000, well, at 12.5, you really need to start using oxygen after a half an hour of flight time. So it's really a very thin veil and a limited sink to be pouring CO2 into, which I think sometimes we fail to forget when we look up through the blue skies. And the moral of the story here is, the way we're laid out is we really can't help but waste energy. Probably the good news is that there are so many ways to save it, very easy way, low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Now, the next set of slides I want to show you is from Italy. I was there at the American Academy of Rome in 2003, 2004 as a landscape fellow. And my project was to look at the Italian urban edge. And it's just sort of a fun comparison now to see these two different cultural landscapes, so to speak. It was quite difficult flying in Italy, figuring out how to get up in the air. I did it a variety of ways, Piper Cubs, ultralights, and police helicopters from the city of Rome. But there were frustrations. The little airports would close at the middle of the day for 2 hours for siesta. This is like a concept I couldn't believe, because it meant you couldn't leave at 11 o'clock because the airport would be closed when you want to come back. So there were a lot of quirks. Anyway, flying off, I flew out of Viterbo, which was about 50 miles north of Rome. And, some of the things that you saw from the air were just incredible. This is an abandoned hill town. Going up Orvieto, a hill town right on the edge. And then for the theme of the project, looking at the urban edge, this is really obviously one of the sharpest edges you'll see, where it literally falls off a cliff onto this beautiful agricultural land. Going up to Pienza, you can see the older part of the city and how the new expansion going out, flying along the edge of the downtown is really quite amazing. Again, another view Pienza looking at the new expansion on the outside. Typical of a lot of these Italian towns is you'll see industrial parks off onto the side. The countryside, which is really preserved well, it's all part of agritourism. Tuscany subsidizes a lot of the sheep and flower field production to encourage tourism. This is Caparola, looking at the Farnese Palace at the base here. Another older hill town right here, Cabranica, and the new growth around it. Another look at the newer extension to the older town. Looking down at the piazzas and the parking. It was interesting, in all these hill towns, you'd never see an SUV or a big car. They've sort of gotten filtered out by the street sizes, though you would see them in the country area. This is Viterbo and the sort of extensive new housing that's been built up over time. And it took me quite a while. I couldn't quite figure out what was really different about this landscape, this type of housing. And it took a little while to realize that there are no lawns. It's just the no lawn culture completely. And it really, I think it enhances the look of the landscape with the olive groves. Every once in a while you'd see sort of this totally non-Italian type of housing. Just another sort of hill town, a little village, and again, sort of the new growth pattern around the edge. This is Todi, looking out, and again, the sharp edge and how well the land is preserved, even though here it's not falling off a cliff, it's developable. Another view of Todi. Here the expansion off of the older part of town. In the distance there above the town you can see their industrial park. These beautiful, tight clustered hamlets. Another hill town. Again, the preserved area right at the edge. Looking at the expansion of yet another hill town coming out, you can see the lack of lawns in the 20th century housing there. Here you're looking at the older medieval village and then the Renaissance extension and then going out to the 19th and 20th century development. This is Cortona. You have the cemetery on the outside of town, the valley, the general landscape around it. Cemetery, just flying over. You can't help yourself when you fly and you see these patterns. This is just a little rise in the soil there, and it's dried out, creating the pattern. Little farm hamlet, some of the buildings associated with it. Another industrial park, very densely put together compared to an American industrial park. The buildings are all clustered tightly together. You do see random big boxes on the landscape, and it really does bring down the overall appearance of the landscape when you see that. This next series is going to be a series of pictures going in and flying around Rome. I start picking up sort of American-looking housing developments and housing plots, apartment buildings. As you get closer in, this is Corby Alley. It's an apartment complex a kilometer long. It's the longest building in the world. Very much like older American public housing, very run down and non-desirable place to live or be quarantined. This is Richard Myers' Jubilee Church, interesting sighting for it in the foreground on the outskirts of Rome. More apartments, very dense apartments. You can see the Vatican in the upper right-hand corner to get a sense of how far you're out from the downtown. Again, these are all about 6 and 8-story apartment buildings and just incredible densities. Back on the outside, or actually we were pretty much on the far edge anyway, just inside the GRA that runs around, the ring road that runs around Rome. An interesting thing here is how narrow the right-of-way is along the roadway going around. Some of the open space, there are quite a few fingers of open space that go into the city, including the Aqueduct Park. Quite a contrast in time and period between the golf course and the aqueduct, and of course the beautiful umbrella pines that are there. So that's what I brought. I'd be glad to take questions.
When you are asked by a city, like say Kansas City, to come and fly around and photograph and then report back about what you found there, what's the response that you get from, what has been the reaction that you get, first of all, immediately, and then are you aware of any impact that your work has had in those cities on their planning process?
Well, it's usually published right afterwards. As you know, we did a public presentation together, which is great feedback. Some of the issues in the Kansas City project, what we were looking at is sustaining sense of region and sort of looking at the natural features, the historical features, and then looking at elements that were homogenizing that landscape. And I think it brings a lot of awareness of what's going on, both for what's there. One of the things that was interesting in Kansas City is just the perception of the floodplain along the Missouri, because it's fairly narrow, it's not populated, and people cross it on its narrow edge. But if you go the length of it, it's hugely extensive. It has beautiful dikes. One of the things that I thought had great potential for a linear park space along the tops of those, but just, you know, creating some of these awareness that people aren't really aware of because of how they perceived it from the ground. And of course, just the new development that's happening and the loss of agricultural land and you know, that whole airport condition when you get out at a new city and you're driving out of the airport, it looks all the same. People are very, very much sort of aware and how far that has gone. And then also a lot of the sort of the unique things in the case of Kansas City, just the, you know, there are probably 5 to 6 huge marshalling yards, how big the rail industry is there, and sort of just the history associated with the river and the rail lines. So yeah, it's just a general good awareness of it. whether this motivates people to, preserve and work harder to preserve the landscape, I think, time will tell. But it's also a tool that I leave the city images to use for public hearings and presentations. So that is also part of it.
Alex,
Yeah.
I went back to see your show in Peabody, Essex 3 times. And you were taking photographs, or at least the photographs on display there were taken with another, what should I say, another mind, or another set of ideas in mind. Could you talk a little bit about that? What went into those? I'm thinking the only overlap that I noticed tonight were the blue tank cars between the PBDS.
Right. It's interesting. When I photograph, I guess a couple things. One is I photograph from different perspectives. I'm very aware of that. At times I'm editorializing, I'm trying to say things about the environment. Other times I'm just documenting what's out on the landscape, and then at other times I really feel like, and I know I'm composing images that come to me that I think work really well as two-dimensional graphics, but are loaded with content and meaning. And together, I think that combination makes for powerful images. And I really, while I'm flying, I'm really free at any time to do whatever I want. Even if I'm working on a commercial job and looking at it from sort of a different point of view. And so I drift in and out of these different modes while I'm flying all the time. And part of the reason for that is that flying itself is so expensive. It would be really frustrating to go out and just photograph for myself to capture these beautiful images, because they don't always come. A lot of them come in a flash. You just see them and grab them and they're there. But I think that's really part of the art, is to be receptive to receive those images when you see them, and to take them. Such as that example of going around the rail yard there and seeing the tracks flash at you, to show the switches. Things like that, and just being receptive and knowing that you've seen something that you want to photograph, and hopefully you've taken it right as you've seen it. It does happen fast. So those pictures at the Peabody Essex are those sort of, a lot of those are those moments where you've seen something that is part of being out there photographing all the time. That is another reason why I photograph from those different perspectives. So I am working all the time and looking at landscapes, even though it's from different points of view. Then the other thing that I do that I think is really important is that I collect a lot of themes, things such as looking at borders, edge conditions, looking at abandonment, and looking at particular land uses, from prisons to housing types. When I was working on the for instance, the visualizing density, I was out flying a lot, recording these pictures. I was trying to do it as interestingly as I can to bring people into the pictures, because that's important, that they aren't just totally boring. But at the same time, I'm looking over my shoulder and seeing, things that I want to photograph. And that's why the GPS track looks like the way it does, is because you're constantly discovering and investigating, and a lot of what you photograph you don't really anticipate. And that's really the fun of going out and flying, is to see these things that you didn't even dream were out there, such as perhaps the pivot irrigators that I started with, and the patterns that are associated with those. Yes?
What's your aerial work effort inspiring you to go back and do something on the ground, or do you just concentrate on aerial work and get as close as you can?
It's a mixed thing, because A lot of times you're flying cross country, for instance, going from Salt Lake City up to Boise, and you're going over the pivots. And other than stopping at the small towns, it's almost impossible to go to those sites. In the urban areas, a lot of times, yeah, you go visit things that you've seen either along a waterway, or you have a layout of the town. Often before I land, if I know I'm spending the night, I'll fly around the town just to orient myself to see if there are places that I'd like to go. Yeah. Keith.
How did you get your start in aerial photography?
I was in GSD over at Harvard, and I had a friend who had a flight school down in Miami. His uncle did. He was a counselor, and I went down and was a counselor and got my license then, and then came back to GSD. I took Doug Way's course on air photo interpretation, and J.B. Jackson's courses on the American landscape. And so it sort of all fit together that way. Larry?
Yeah. Do you find yourself switching modes between the editorial and the documentary mode? You know, like flatter the client's picture, okay, but now complain about sprawl, or do you find yourself opportunistically moving among the modes of inquiry that you have, or do you stay put for a period of time, like, let me flatter this, or let me complain about this for a while? Or is it just because you're flying, you have to switch back and forth and then rely on the aftermath to sort out the categories and editorialize based on that?
No, I think I usually, when I'm photographing, I'm thinking, and I feel like I'm talking with the camera, and I'm saying things with the camera. And so I usually frame a picture with, a story or a feeling in mind. When I'm not photographing well usually. That's when I'm pretty much just documenting what's there. And it's kind of a boring state to be in. And it's interesting, though, sometimes when I'm flying one place to the next to do a job, it will be such a long period of time that I get bored, and I just like, especially if it's like end of the day and the light's nice, I'll go down and just start flying to, amuse myself, really looking at, to entertain myself from this arduous trip. It's funny because there are moments in flying. I was talking to a flight instructor about flying across the country, and he was going, that must be just fantastic to do that. It's just great. And then he stopped for a while. I said, God, it must get awfully boring too, And so there is kind of that mix in between. No, I know what you're saying. There are times when I'm looking at a project through the client's eyes and the way the client wants to see that. And I'll get annoyed if I go out all day because my schedule with commercial jobs is such that I haven't taken time for myself to photograph for myself, and I really wasn't looking around. There are days where that happens, where you just go out and do your work and come back, and it's very unsatisfying in a way.
Do you think of some angles? I mean, there are a lot of wonderful oblique angles that often are quite flattering to things. Are there some angles that are intrinsically flattering versus the kind of angle if you wanted to really show something that was very negative? Is there some particular angle that you go for? Do you sense any pattern to when you're trying to flatter, versus when you're trying to denigrate?
Yeah, there is, but it's more about light than the angle. If you want to do hardscapes, do it at around 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun is just glaringly blue. So there are periods, and that works well. And one thing I've always said is you really have to like the light you're dealt when you're out there to be photographing. And you're not going to be photographing the same things with warm light as you are with cold light. And so you really have to take advantage of the light conditions at the time. Yeah.
Really a comment, I think, on your work, Alex, rather than a question. There are, I don't know how many million pilots there are in America. And of those, what fraction of them have an eye to take a photograph like you do? And that tells me that you, in fact, are not just photographing for your clients. You're photographing for all of us, because that number, that percentage of pilots with a fine eye, and right light, and an ability to fly and photograph at the same time, of all of us, is a very, very tiny percentage. So I want to thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.